Got my coffee and today's guests here with me. And today is very special because it's a continued conversation from last episode. So if you haven't yet listened to the last episode, please do so because it's the first part of the conversation that you're about to hear. And I'm here again with my guests, Francesca Poggiali, the Chief Public Policy Officer at GS1, and Vincenzo Renda, the Director for Single Market and Digital Competitiveness at DigitalEurope. So in the last episode, we focused mostly on basically introducing what CIRPASS is and what the digital product passport is and how the legal and voluntary requirements are impacting all of us, what pilots are showing us about the digital product passports, and how identification schemes are basically enabling digital product passports for the everyday products that we use. Today, we will focus more on the topics of implementing the digital product passports, what impacts do they have around supply chains, and how companies can actually adopt them into their operations. Have fun with my conversation with Vincenzo and Francesca. Francesca, I think this is really interesting to hear how interoperability identification is really relevant in this context, and we're actually talking digital. We're talking about the digital product passport. Vincenzo, maybe a question to you. DigitalEurope that you're representing is basically representing digitally transforming industries in Europe. How do you see DPPs aligning with basically the broader digital transformation agenda that we have been seeing in Europe already for some time? And also, what potential impact do you foresee that the DPPs will have on the digital competitiveness in Europe?
I think, Michael, that's a great question. So really thanks a lot for asking. That is a very crucial one. I think in particular at this stage where we see as an organization renewed attention by our political leaders across Europe to see, should we talk of a new competitiveness deal for Europe? And I think here we are looking at what's been happening in other regions of the world, which are also lining up their own incentives for industry, to build within their region. I can start off by saying that there are some targets that the Commission has set by 2030. Which are all about, a certain number of SMEs that are able to use AI, big data, cloud computing, deployment of climate-neutral edge nodes to really speed up connectivity, the number of ICT specialists in Europe. I think that's a particular one where, unfortunately, progress is very slow in Europe, but also the number of citizens that have basic digital skills, which are something that I think is absolutely important as we're talking about the DPP, right? People will need to access public at large. Will need to learn what's a QR code and what it means, to access information that is stored in it, right? So I would say that it's important to highlight here that the DPP is really an unprecedented tool, effectively, when it comes to regulation. And maybe we haven't mentioned yet, but there are some clear, potential benefits from it. And I'm thinking about the ability to electronically register, process, or share product-related information throughout the entire supply chain. Talking about digitizing labels, and I think crucially, streamlining compliance documentation. Now, there is a lot of talk in Europe that sometimes these regulations add a lot of administrative burden to industry. And when I say industry, I'm thinking in particular to the small players that cannot really, afford to spare so many resources in so many different things. And the DPP could play a good role there if well designed. I'm also thinking about how it could inform business decisions on all those supply chain environmental sustainability metrics. So it's a very important tool. But when I think about your question, the role of competitiveness here, I do really see that it's very important to get right tools like this. And I'm just thinking that, we don't want the DPP to become a burden on industry by means of maybe duplicating existing provisions that already exist in other laws. And sometimes I hear about, should we put everything into the DPP, even if it's part of a different EU law? Well, it's not that simple, right? Because probably the outcome is that you will do maybe double compliance processes or double reporting, because the original reporting requirement is not phased out. So you will effectively include in the DPP what you will also have to inform your authorities about in a different context, right? So, this type of things, it's very important to get them right. And so it's really, a work in progress here. But I would say that when it comes to the broader competitiveness agenda, there is really an important point to make, which is about implementing well all the various digital regulations that we have seen as Digital Europe recently coming up, and some are about sustainability, some are about the AI Act, which really we saw a lot of headlines all over the world essentially, cybersecurity. From the business angle, this means that we have a compliance department that will receive all that and will need to figure out how to implement all these rules. So I would really say let's make sure that the DPP is able to complement maybe what we already have, that is able to be clear in implementation. And I would say one important point around the standards is that now those standards they will need to be proposed by the standardization bodies, and Francesca mentioned before Sensenelec, and the timeline is very short. It's about 2 years or even less, and then is probably around 1 year for industry. I'm thinking about the batteries industry, because the DPP for batteries will come in February 27, about 1 year to really prepare. So it's important to see, can we build on what already maybe the industry is doing, including in terms of using particular standards that the industry believes are relevant, to make sure that the implementation is smooth. So for me, implementation is critical in the context of competitiveness. And then, of course, when it comes to digitalization, there's so much more to do when it comes, I just think about one area, digital upskilling, right? I mentioned before that we have some targets by 2030 that the EU has set. And I think we really need to do much more to really make sure that consumers are able to use technology, because it leads to tremendous amount of benefits. And I mentioned for the DPP some of those before, and I think it's really important that we want to unlock those, right? So I would say that as critical points here.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree, Vincenzo, with what you just said. And I think what I'm hearing more and more with talking about people outside of Europe is also that Europe is becoming an example for a lot of countries, for a lot of regions globally, looking at the digital agenda, looking at the sustainability agenda, the circularity agenda, in basically setting standards and setting the bar, basically, in many cases for how to approach these things. So I think it's very important to take everyone in Europe with us on this journey when it comes to skilling, but also awareness and explaining why we do things. And that's the business people as well as the consumers, the investors, and all the different stakeholder groups that we have in this context. Francesca, maybe a question to you on that. I mean, how do you envision the future of DPPs and their role in the supply and demand chain? How do you see, Vincenzo mentioned earlier the role in the supply chain. How do you see that? How do you see that evolving? But also, how do you see the role of DPPs in that context?
Thank you for the question. And I think it's a very important one. When we look at the future, what will happen to supply chains, how they become greener, more transparent, because there are a lot of discussions around the due diligence. And if you put the digital product passport, the deforestation law, the green claims law, the new right for consumers, if you put all those legislation into a context and into perspective, and Vincenzo already mentioned others, acts like the artificial intelligence one and the others. Of course, we hear industry multiplying the efforts. We see them multiplying the efforts in order to engage on their supply chains that needs to become greener, more resilient, more ethical. But if we look at the past, I think we will find already some resources. So in order to look at the future, we look at the past as well. What is really happening? I don't see industry as, an entity that is just there waiting and now out of a sudden they need to adapt to a new regulation. Actually, the European legislative process gives a lot of opportunities to industry to be involved since the real beginning, and associations like DigitalEurope and others that were participating in CIRPASS and standardization bodies like ourselves and academia and others like the Senelec that Vincenzo mentioned that is going to develop the standards. So I think all this ecosystem is there to prepare and to get and the supply chains are being already adapted, and we as GS1 we serve nearly 40 sectors, and you could of course guess that behind each sector there are global supply chains. And based on our experience, I can say that, there is a lot of resilience and capability to adapt and to see the opportunities and overcome the challenges. And regulations are opportunities normally. So it is. I hear also a lot of positiveness regarding the role that you, Michael, described for Europe being the center of this new circular economy agenda. So, as you said, Europe is becoming an example. So, I think, to answer to your question more directly, that the DPP will be an accelerator in this transition, in this already change of mindset, but also change of operational capability of supply chains. So, I think that maybe in 7 years, if you invite us for another webinar, I think we will give the DPP for granted, because it is really an accelerator. It really represents the possibility of going to the next level on data or on circularity or on your digitalization process. If you're a company that is maybe doing very well in one of those three pillars, and with the DPP you can accelerate in the other two. And I think this will bring the whole European ecosystem and the European single market to the next level, especially of digitalization and circularity, of course, which was the main goal.
Absolutely, I fully agree. The coffee is unfortunately empty, and it's time to wrap up this episode of the Circular Coffee Break podcast. But Vincenzo, maybe a final question. So CIRPASS ended with the final event in March. How do you see CIRPASS evolving, and how do you see the project and the outcomes you've been developing influence policy making and the future of DPPs, and related to that, also the digital competitiveness in Europe, as Francesca just outlined?
Yes, I think I would say that what we see really important in CIRPASS is being able to bring together various sectors, with maybe different starting points, and then see where consensus lies. And I think CIRPASS 1 was really important to really to just bring, views on the DPP, on the potential rollout, or maybe the open questions that we still need to address. And looking into the future, probably, CIRPASS 2 will be equally important, and we're very happy to be part of that. And we will continue to see the importance of this project when it comes to really testing different, rollout solutions. CIRPASS 2 will be more and more into implementation and feasibility for industry and what it means to implement a DPP. What are the constraints? What are the easy solutions to some of the points in the legislation? And so the project, I would imagine it to be able to offer views, and then it's up to the policymakers to see, what could be taken up out of that project. And I value the role of this type of initiatives that are meant to advise, the way forward on implementation. The DPP is a complex tool. There are some, open questions that still need to be answered. Unfortunately, we didn't have so much time today, but we think about, for example, the backup provision for a DPP, which was part of the final deal, and what that means. It will only be defined in, future implementing measures. So the full, let's say, the complete job is not yet done. And again, CIRPASS can continue to feed information, to feed views, of the stakeholders out there. And it's a complex tool, as I said, so it's important to get it right at the beginning. In our view, starting out small to then grow over time once the industry becomes more and more accustomed to it. It's important to bring everybody along the journey. We want to be gradual. We want to phase in with the right timelines, and again, I think this is super important that the Commission has initiatives like this one. As I said at the beginning, we are very much happy to be part of it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Francesca. Thanks a lot, Vincenzo, for joining me today. Really interesting. And I really love the very pragmatic approach and the solution-driven approach that you've been bringing forward and explaining what the DPP is. Thanks for joining me. That said, the coffee is empty. And unfortunately, we have to conclude the discussion around CIRPASS and the digital product passport here. Even 2 episodes are not enough to basically cover all the different aspects and all the different dimensions of the digital product passport. And I guess we could have gone on for another hour easily to discuss the topic with Vincenzo and Francesca. And we might do that in the context of CIRPASS 2 as things are progressing. As you just heard from Francesca, the next one is starting soon. For all of you listening out there, as always, we hope the episode was interesting and brought some new ideas, and you have a better understanding of what's happening around the DPP, what's happening around the EU legislation when it comes to circularity and product circulation. If you like the podcast, you can help us out growing the Circular Coffee Break community by giving us a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcasting platform. And actually, also, if you don't like the podcast, you can do that. But I guess it's more likely that you do it if you like the podcast. So I'll stay with that. Please also remember to subscribe to stay in the loop. There's a lot of great future guests that we're already planning to have, new topics, new perspectives that we're planning to bring to all of you. And as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, let us know if there's specific topics or guests you would like to see or hear about on the podcast. We're very eager to hear your thoughts and get additional inspiration. All left for me is to thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here at the Circular Coffee Break podcast.